The day I found the other woman's earring in my husband's pocket was also the day my daughter begged me on her knees not to leave him. I stood in our bedroom, that tiny diamond stud burning between my fingers like a hot coal, while downstairs Sarah sobbed that she couldn't handle another family falling apart. My own child was pleading for me to swallow my dignity, just like I'd been doing for the last 22 years. I remember how the autumn light slanted through our bedroom window, catching dust particles in the air as my world collapsed inward. Frank had left for work an hour earlier, kissing me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't come home last night with another woman's jewelry hidden in his coat. The coat I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago with money I'd saved from my teaching assistant job. The house was suddenly too quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my late father, who had warned me about Frank's wandering eyes even then. "Men like him don't change, Elaine," he'd said. If only I'd listened. My sister Rebecca had seen them together at the Lakeside Hotel bar 2 towns over. "I wasn't going to tell you," she'd said over the phone last night, her voice tight with anger. "But then I thought about how Mom stayed with Dad through all his affairs, how it hollowed her out until there was nothing left. Don't forgive her," my sister warned. "Don't forgive him. Not this time." I sank onto the edge of our bed, the same bed where we'd conceived Sarah, where we'd made love on Sunday mornings, where I'd lain awake countless nights waiting for him to come home. The earring sat in my palm, a tiny, damning star. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." The same message he'd sent dozens of times before. How had I been so blind? Sarah's footsteps on the stairs pulled me back to the present. I quickly slipped the earring into my pocket as my 18-year-old daughter appeared in the doorway, eyes red from crying. "Mom," she whispered, "I heard you talking to Aunt Rebecca last night." Something cold slithered down my spine. "What did you hear?" "Everything," her voice cracked. "About Dad and that woman." I tried to stay strong, to be the mother she needed, but my voice betrayed me. "Sarah, honey, sometimes adults, please don't leave him," she interrupted, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Mom. Kayla's parents just got divorced and now she's moving away. And Tyler's dad left last year and he's completely messed up now. I can't," she choked on a sob. "I can't handle it if you guys split up. Not before college. Please." My daughter, my beautiful, intelligent daughter, who had her whole life ahead of her, was begging me to stay in a broken marriage. For her. And God help me, I was considering it. "He loves us, Mom," Sarah continued, stepping into the room. "I know he does. Everyone makes mistakes." Mistakes? As if sleeping with another woman was like forgetting to take out the trash. As if the years of lies and late nights and unexplained absences were just mistakes. Sarah fell to her knees in front of me, gripping my hands. "Please," she begged. Just give him one more chance. For me." I looked down at my daughter, at the desperation in her eyes, and felt something inside me crack. Her tears broke my heart more thoroughly than Frank's betrayal ever could, because while he had chosen to hurt me, I could never choose to hurt her. "Okay," I whispered, hating myself even as I said it. "Okay, honey, I'll try." The relief on her face was immediate, but something else flickered there too. Something that looked almost like guilt. She hugged me fiercely, thanking me over and over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her reaction than simple relief. As she left the room, I pulled the earring from my pocket again, studying its glittering surface. Something about it seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. I opened my jewelry box to tuck it away and froze. There, in the velvet-lined compartment, was its match. They were mine, from the set Frank had given me for our 20th anniversary. The set I rarely wore because they were too extravagant for everyday life in our small Connecticut town. The earrings I'd noticed were missing one a few weeks ago, but hadn't mentioned to anyone. Why would Sarah? The realization hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had planted the earring in Frank's coat. She had manipulated my greatest fear to achieve. What? What was she hiding? I sank back onto the bed, both earrings now clutched in my palm, as the grandfather clock continued its merciless ticking downstairs. My name is Elaine Matthews. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent most of my life in Harborview, Connecticut, a picture-perfect New England town where everyone knows your business but pretends they don't. I teach 3rd grade at Harborview Elementary, the same school I attended as a child. the same school where my daughter Sarah excelled before heading off to senior year at the local high school. Our house is a modest colonial on Maple Street, with blue shutters that need repainting, and a garden I tend religiously every spring and summer. Frank, my husband of 22 years, runs a successful insurance agency downtown. From the outside, we're the ideal American family, comfortable, respectable, normal. But normalcy is often just a carefully constructed facade. Every morning, I wake up at 5:30 a.m., brew coffee, prepare breakfast, pack lunches, grade papers, and make sure everyone starts their day right. I've done this for decades, the invisible machinery that keeps our lives running smoothly. Frank kisses me absently before heading to work. Sarah, when she's not rushing out to meet friends, mumbles thanks before disappearing into her day. I've built my life around them, these two people who sometimes feel like strangers living in my home. I gave up a promising career in educational administration to raise Sarah. I've managed our household budget, organized every holiday, remembered every birthday, consoled every heartbreak, celebrated every triumph. I've been the glue holding everything together for so long, I sometimes wonder if I exist outside of that role anymore. Frank wasn't always distant. When we met in college, me studying education, him business, he would write me love notes and leave them in my textbooks. He would call just to hear my voice. He planned elaborate dates on a student budget. I fell in love with his ambition, his charm, his ability to make everyone in a room feel special. Only later did I realize that his charm was both his greatest gift and my biggest warning sign. The problems started small, as they always do. Late nights at the office, business trips that extended without explanation, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't mine. Texts he would hide, calls he would take outside. Each time I confronted him, each time he had an explanation, each time I chose to believe him. For Sarah, my daughter was always a daddy's girl. Frank coached her soccer team, helped with science projects, taught her to drive. He was the fun parent, the one who said yes when I said no, who brought home surprises and planned adventures. I was the one who nursed fevers, enforced curfews, checked homework. Necessary, but not exciting. The foundation, not the facade. My sister Rebecca has been telling me to leave him for years. "You deserve better, Elaine," she'd say during our weekly phone calls. "Sarah's almost grown. What are you waiting for?" What was I waiting for? Perhaps for Sarah to be truly independent. Perhaps for irrefutable proof. Perhaps for the courage to start over at an age when most women are settling into the second half of their lives with partners who've proven their loyalty. Or perhaps I was waiting because deep down, beneath the hurt and resentment, I still loved the man I married, or at least the memory of him. The morning I found what I thought was evidence of Frank's latest affair changed everything. Not because it confirmed my suspicions, but because it revealed a truth far more disturbing. My daughter was willing to manipulate my deepest insecurities to protect something. After Sarah left my bedroom, I sat holding those identical earrings, my mind racing. Why would she do this? What was she hiding that was worth making me doubt my sanity, my marriage? What was so important that she'd orchestrate this elaborate deception? I've spent my entire adult life being the stable one, the reasonable one, the one who keeps the peace at any cost. But as I put those earrings back in my jewelry box and wiped away my tears, something shifted inside me. A quiet determination took root where resignation had lived for too long. I pulled out my phone and canceled my classes for the day, something I've done only 3 times in 15 years of teaching. I needed answers. And for once, maintaining the appearance of normalcy could wait. As I moved through our house that morning, the house filled with family photos showing smiling faces and captured moments of happiness, I realized how little I knew about what was really happening under my own roof. My daughter, my sweet Sarah, who'd been acting strange for months now, staying out late, becoming secretive, her grades slipping despite her previous academic excellence. What was she hiding? And Frank, was he really having an affair? Or had I been suspicious for so long that I was ready to believe anything? Had I been so focused on my husband's potential betrayals that I'd missed what was happening with my daughter? The grandfather clock in the hallway, my father's wedding gift, chimed 9 times as I made myself another cup of coffee and sat at our kitchen table. Outside, Harborview was coming fully awake. Neighbors leaving for work, school buses making their rounds, the mail carrier starting his daily route. Normal life continuing while mine was spinning off its axis. I picked up my phone again and texted Sarah. "Hope you have a good day at school, honey. I love you." Then I opened my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I logged into our family cell phone account. It was time to start finding answers. The cell phone records were the first domino to fall. As I scrolled through the call logs and text message records, a pattern emerged that made my stomach tighten with dread. Sarah had been in regular contact with a number I didn't recognize. Late-night calls, messages sent during school hours, hundreds of texts in the past month alone. But what froze the blood in my veins was seeing that same unknown number in Frank's call history. Not as frequent, but definitely there. My husband and daughter were both in contact with the same person, and neither had mentioned it to me. My hands trembled as I copied the number and ran it through a reverse lookup service. The name that appeared on my screen was Jason Mercer. It meant nothing to me. A stranger, somehow connected to both my husband and daughter, yet never mentioned in our home. I took a deep breath and did what any desperate mother would do. I checked Sarah's social media. Though she had always been private about her online presence, I knew her passwords from the days when we had an agreement that I could monitor her accounts. She'd probably changed them since, but to my surprise, they still worked. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. Posts about school, friends, typical teenage content. But in her direct messages, I found conversations with this Jason Mercer. He appeared to be in his early 20s from his profile picture, handsome in that polished way that immediately puts mothers on alert. As I read their exchanges, my heart sank further. "Did you talk to your dad again?" He'd written 3 weeks ago. "Yes, he's still willing to help us," Sarah had replied. "But my mom can't know. She wouldn't understand. Your dad said the same thing. We need to be careful." They were conspiring, my husband and daughter, keeping secrets from me. The betrayal cut deeper than any affair could have. After years of suspecting Frank of cheating, it turned out he and Sarah were the ones with a hidden relationship, but not the kind I had feared. This was something else entirely. I closed the laptop, feeling sick. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I grabbed my car keys and left the house, driving aimlessly through the familiar streets of Harborview, past the elementary school where I taught, past the high school where Sarah was supposed to be in class right now, past Frank's insurance office with its respectable brick facade and gleaming windows. Without consciously deciding, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Lighthouse Cafe, where Rebecca and I met every Saturday for lunch. My sister wasn't there, of course. She'd be at work in New Haven, where she managed an art gallery, but I needed the comfort of somewhere familiar that wasn't tainted by lies. "Elaine, unusual to see you on a Monday," called Marge, the owner who'd been serving us coffee since we were teenagers. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just needed a change of scenery. Class preparation." She didn't believe me. Marge had known me too long, but she brought me coffee and a slice of blueberry pie without asking questions, then left me alone in the corner booth. As I stared out the window at Harborview Harbor, where fishing boats and pleasure craft bobbed in the autumn sunshine, my phone buzzed with a text. "Frank, got a call from school. Sarah didn't show up today. Everything okay?" So Sarah wasn't at school either. My daughter, my straight-A student who'd never skipped a class in her life, was missing school, and somehow Frank had heard about it before me. Another small betrayal in what was becoming an avalanche. I didn't reply to his message. Instead, I dialed Sarah's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. My fingers hovered over the keypad before I made a decision that went against everything I believed in about trust and privacy. I opened the Find My Phone app that we'd installed on everyone's phones years ago for emergencies. Sarah had probably forgotten it was even there. The location that appeared on the map made no sense at first. It was an address in Rockport, the next town over. Specifically, the Rockport Memorial Hospital. Fear replaced betrayal in an instant. Why was my daughter at a hospital? Had something happened to her? Was she hurt? I threw money on the table, called a hurried goodbye to Marge, and rushed to my car. The drive to Rockport took 20 minutes, every second filled with terrible scenarios playing through my mind. At the hospital, I parked haphazardly and ran to the entrance, my teacher lanyard still around my neck, my panic evident enough that the receptionist immediately gave me her attention. "My daughter," I gasped. "Sarah Matthews. I think she's here." The woman typed something into her computer and looked up with a practiced, neutral expression. "We don't have any patients registered under that name." "But her phone is here," I insisted, showing her the app on my screen. "She's 17. Please, if there's been an accident..." "Mom?" I turned to find Sarah standing in the lobby, perfectly unharmed, wearing the same clothes she'd left the house in that morning. Next to her stood a young man I recognized from the social media profile, Jason Mercer. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her face pale with shock. "What am I doing here?" My voice rose despite the public setting. "Your school called your father because you're absent. Your phone is off. I've been worried sick." Sarah exchanged a glance with Jason that made my blood boil. They had a silent language already, these two. "Mrs. Matthews," Jason began in a respectful tone that did nothing to calm me. "I can explain." "No," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward. "I should be the one to tell her." A nurse approached, her expression concerned. "Everything okay here, Dr. Mercer?" "Doctor?" The young man couldn't be older than 25. "Everything's fine, Nancy," he assured her. "Family discussion." The nurse nodded and withdrew, but not before giving me a look that somehow combined sympathy and judgment in equal measure. "Let's go somewhere private," Sarah suggested, her voice small but determined. She led us to a waiting area that was momentarily empty. As we sat on uncomfortable plastic chairs, I noticed how Jason positioned himself protectively beside my daughter, how she leaned slightly toward him, how they both seemed braced for my reaction. "I've been volunteering here," Sarah began, the words tumbling out quickly. "In the pediatric oncology ward. That's how I met Jason, Dr. Mercer. He's a resident specializing in pediatric cancer treatment." I stared at them, trying to process this information that aligned with none of my fears or suspicions. "You've been volunteering at a hospital? Since when? Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Since June, and I didn't tell you because of how it started." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to donate bone marrow to a little girl named Emma. She has leukemia, Mom." Jason picked up the explanation, his professional demeanor softening. "Sarah came in for preliminary testing 4 months ago. Her father brought her. Frank knows about this?" The betrayal resurged, sharper now. Sarah nodded. "Dad's been helping me. We knew you wouldn't approve of me being a donor. You've always been so protective, so worried about everything. After Grandpa died of cancer, you can barely stand to hear the word." It was true. My father's death from pancreatic cancer 5 years ago had devastated me. The treatments, the hospital visits, watching him waste away, it had been unbearable. "So you both lied to me," I said flatly. "For months. We were trying to protect you," Sarah insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "And then, when you found that earring and jumped to conclusions about Dad having an affair, I panicked. I couldn't let you leave him over something he wasn't even doing. He's been driving me here twice a week, supporting me through this whole process." The irony was bitter on my tongue. For years I'd suspected Frank of the worst kind of betrayal, only to discover he'd been supporting our daughter through a secret act of tremendous generosity. And Sarah, my transparent, honest child, had manipulated my deepest insecurity to keep me from discovering their charitable conspiracy. "The transplant is scheduled for next week," Jason added gently. "Sarah's a perfect match for Emma. She's going to save her life." I should have felt pride. I should have felt relief that my fears of infidelity were unfounded. Instead, all I felt was excluded, shut out from one of the most significant decisions in my daughter's life, deemed too fragile to handle the truth by the two people I loved most. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. Neither tried to stop me as I walked out of the waiting area, through the lobby, and into the hospital parking lot where the autumn sun continued to shine, oblivious to how thoroughly my understanding of my family had just been shattered. As I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, unable to drive, unable to go back inside, memories washed over me like waves threatening to pull me under. 20 years earlier, Frank and I had just brought newborn Sarah home from the hospital. I was exhausted from a difficult delivery, terrified of doing something wrong, overwhelmed by the responsibility of this tiny human who depended on us for everything. "What if I'm not good at this?" I'd whispered to Frank as we watched our daughter sleep in her bassinet. "You already are," he'd said, wrapping his arms around me. "You're going to be an amazing mother, Elaine. The kind who puts her child first, always." And I hadn't I? When Sarah was 2 and developed severe asthma, I'd taken a year's leave from teaching to care for her. I'd sat up countless nights with her tiny body in my arms, the nebulizer humming, praying each breath would come easier than the last. When money was tight after Frank's first business venture failed, I'd picked up evening tutoring jobs while still teaching full-time, coming home to cook dinner and help with homework, operating on 4 hours of sleep for months. I'd sold my grandmother's antique jewelry collection, my only inheritance, to help Frank start over with his insurance agency. "You saved us," Frank had said the day his new office opened. "I'll never forget this, Elaine. Never." But he had forgotten, hadn't he? Or at least, he'd forgotten to include me in our daughter's life when it really mattered. I remembered Sarah at 7, standing on a stool in our kitchen, helping me bake cookies for her class, flour dusting her nose, concentration furrowing her brow as she carefully measured vanilla extract. "Why do you always help everyone, Mommy?" she'd asked. "You make cookies for my class and soup for Mrs. Perkins when she's sick, and you stay late to help your students. Because that's what we do for people we care about," I'd told her, smoothing her hair. "We show up for them. We help when it's needed, not just when it's convenient." The memory brought fresh pain. I'd taught her to care for others, to be generous with her time and compassion, and now she was living those values in the most profound way, offering part of herself to save a stranger's child. I should have been proud, should have been the first person supporting her. Instead, I'd been deemed too fragile to handle the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Are you with Sarah? She says you're at the hospital. Please call me." Before I could respond, another memory surfaced. This one from my own childhood. I was 12, sitting in a hospital waiting room much like the one I'd just left, while my mother spoke with doctors about my father's heart attack. It was the first of many cardiac episodes that would plague him for years before cancer eventually claimed him. "Why didn't you tell me Dad was sick?" I'd asked my mother later, hurt by the secrets. "I wanted to protect you," she'd said, the same words Sarah had just used with me. "Some things are too heavy for children to carry." But Sarah wasn't a child anymore, was she? She was 17, making an adult decision to donate bone marrow, facing her fears of hospitals and needles to help someone else. And I'd been so caught up in my suspicions about Frank, so defined by my role as protector, that I'd missed my daughter's transformation into a young woman of extraordinary courage. Another text from Frank. "Elaine, please, we need to talk. I thought of the night, 15 years ago, when Sarah had fallen from the jungle gym at the park and broken her arm. How Frank had frozen in panic while I'd calmly gathered our crying child, driven to the emergency room, handled the paperwork, soothed her through x-rays and casting. How the nurses had commented on my composure. 'I don't know how you're so calm,' Frank had said afterward. 'One of us needs to be,' I'd replied, not unkindly. 'She needs to see that we're not falling apart, even when things are scary.' Had I been too strong for too long? Had I created this dynamic where Frank and Sarah felt they needed to protect me from difficult truths? I thought of my father's final days, how I'd sat by his hospital bed reading to him from his favorite poetry collection while my mother and sister took breaks. How I'd helped the nurses turn him, change him, maintain his dignity in those final, difficult moments. How I'd arranged the funeral, supported my mother through her grief, never allowing myself to fall apart because others needed me to be strong. "You're just like him," my mother had said after the funeral. "Your father never showed when he was hurting either." My phone rang. Sarah this time, not a text. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom." Her voice was small, afraid. "Are you still here?" "I'm in the parking lot," I said, surprised by how steady I sounded despite the tears streaming down my face. Can I come out? Just me?" "Yes." 5 minutes later, she slid into the passenger seat of my car, looking younger than her 17 years, vulnerability written across her features. "I'm sorry," she began. "I should have told you from the beginning. It was my idea not to, not Dad's. I knew how hard Grandpa's cancer was for you, and then when we found out Emma has the same kind of leukemia that killed your college roommate," I stared at her. "How do you know about Julia?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "I found your college yearbook last year, with the note about her passing, and then Dad told me more, about how you took a semester off to care for her, how you were there when she died, how you've never been the same about hospitals since then." The realization that my husband and daughter had discussed my past trauma, my deepest hurts, without me being present felt like another betrayal. But beneath that hurt was something else, a recognition that perhaps they saw me more clearly than I saw myself. "Tell me about Emma," I said finally. Sarah's face transformed, lighting up with purpose. She's 8. She loves horses and wants to be a veterinarian. She's been fighting leukemia for 2 years. And she's so brave, Mom. So brave. When they told her they found a donor match, she was worried about me instead of herself. Can you believe that? As Sarah continued to talk about this child she'd come to care for, I saw my daughter anew, her compassion, her determination, her capacity for selfless love, qualities I'd helped nurture, even if the expression of them had been hidden from me. I wanted to tell you so many times, Sarah confessed, especially when you'd ask why I was tired, or why I needed Dad to drive me places. But then I'd remember how you couldn't even watch medical shows on TV after Grandpa died, how you'd leave the room if cancer was mentioned in a movie. So instead, you let me believe your father was having an affair? I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. That was wrong. I panicked. When I heard you and Aunt Rebecca talking, when I saw how upset you were, I just grabbed the first earring I could find in your jewelry box and put it in Dad's coat. I thought if you confronted him, he'd have to tell you the truth about where we've been going, and then you'd be upset about the hospital, not about him cheating. The twisted logic of it was so teenaged, so impulsive. This brilliant, compassionate girl still had the decision-making capacity of an adolescent, something I'd forgotten in my shock. You could have just told me the truth this morning, when I agreed not to leave your father. I know, she whispered. I was going to, after school. I was trying to figure out how. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of months of deception hanging between us. I'd like to meet her, I said finally. Emma, if that's okay. Sarah looked up, hope blooming on her face. Really? You'd come inside? I nodded, finding strength I didn't know I had. My daughter is about to do something incredibly brave and selfless. I want to be there for her, every step of the way. Sarah lunged across the console to hug me, awkwardly but fiercely. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry we didn't trust you. I should have known you'd be stronger than your fears. As we embraced in the front seat of my car, another text came through from Frank. Elaine, please tell me you're okay. I'm leaving the office now. I showed the message to Sarah. He's really worried, she said. He loves you so much, Mom. These past few months, driving me to appointments and tests, all he'd talk about was how amazing you are, how he doesn't deserve you, how he wishes he could be as strong as you are. The Frank she described bore little resemblance to the man I'd been suspecting of infidelity for years. Had I been so wrong? Or had these months of secret hospital visits changed him too? I texted back, I'm with Sarah. We're okay. Meet us at Rockport Memorial. Then I turned to my daughter. Before we go in, I need you to promise me something. Anything, she said immediately. No more secrets. No more trying to protect me from the truth. I'm your mother, Sarah. Let me be strong for you when you need it. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I promise. As we got out of the car and walked toward the hospital entrance, I felt something shifting inside me, a realization that perhaps my greatest strength wasn't in handling everything alone, but in allowing myself to be vulnerable with the people I loved most. Frank arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, his face drawn with worry, his tie askew as if he'd been tugging at it nervously. When he saw Sarah and me sitting together in the pediatric oncology waiting room, something like relief washed over his features, quickly followed by apprehension. Elaine, he began, approaching cautiously. I can explain everything. Sarah already has, I said, my voice cooler than I intended. Despite understanding their motives, the hurt of their deception still stung. Frank looked between us, assessing the situation. I should have told you from the beginning. It was wrong to keep this from you. Yes, it was, I agreed, standing to face him. 22 years of marriage, and suddenly this man felt like a stranger. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to let me believe you were having an affair while you were actually bringing our daughter to cancer treatments? A nurse passing by glanced our way, and Frank gently guided me to a more private corner of the waiting area, his hand on my elbow familiar, yet somehow presumptuous. I wanted to tell you so many times, he said, his voice low. But Sarah was adamant that it would be too much for you, after your father and Julia. And honestly, I was afraid too. Afraid you'd forbid her from donating. Afraid you'd be angry we'd made this decision without you. So you decided lying was better? Letting me suspect the worst about you for months? Frank looked genuinely shocked. You thought I was having an affair this whole time? Not just this morning with the earring? Frank, you've been disappearing for hours, coming home late, being secretive with your phone, taking calls outside. The list of suspicious behaviors seemed endless when I started enumerating them. He ran a hand through his graying hair. I was coordinating with Dr. Mercer, arranging Sarah's appointments around your schedule so you wouldn't notice. The calls were about her test results, about the donation process. It made sense, yet the truth felt hollow after months of suspicion. You could have trusted me, I said, and the hurt in my voice was unmistakable. I know that now, Frank replied, reaching for my hand. I allowed him to take it, but the connection felt tenuous. When I saw how quick you were to believe I was cheating, I realized we've been growing apart for years. That's on me, Elaine. I've taken you for granted. Before I could respond, Jason Mercer approached us, his white coat pristine, his expression professionally pleasant. Mrs. Matthews, Mr. Matthews, Sarah, if you're ready, Emma and her parents would like to meet all of you. Sarah immediately brightened, looking to me with hope in her eyes. Is that okay, Mom? I nodded, pushing aside my personal hurt to focus on what mattered now. Of course. We followed Dr. Mercer down a corridor decorated with cheerful murals of animals and storybook characters, designed to make the sterile environment less frightening for young patients. He stopped outside a room with a hand-drawn sign that read, Emma's Kingdom, in rainbow letters. They're expecting you, he said, knocking lightly before opening the door. Inside, a small girl with a colorful headscarf sat on a hospital bed surrounded by stuffed animals. Despite the pallor of her skin and the thinness of her frame, her smile was radiant when she saw Sarah. You brought your mom and dad, she exclaimed, her voice surprisingly strong. Sarah immediately went to her side, sitting on the edge of the bed with the easy familiarity of someone who had been here many times before. I did. Mom, Dad, this is Emma, the bravest person I know. A woman rose from a chair beside the bed, clearly Emma's mother, though exhaustion had etched deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Mrs. Matthews, she said, crossing to take my hands in hers. I'm Diane Porter. I can't begin to tell you what your daughter is doing for us. For Emma. The raw gratitude in her eyes made my throat tighten. Behind her, a man who must have been Emma's father stood, one hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. We've heard so much about you from Sarah, Diane continued. She said you're the reason she's the person she is today, that you taught her the importance of helping others. The irony of being praised for values I'd instilled in Sarah while having been kept in the dark about their greatest expression wasn't lost on me. I managed to smile. Sarah makes her own choices. Good ones, apparently. Emma patted the bed on her other side. Come sit, Mrs. Matthews. I want to show you my scrapbook. Sarah's in it now. As I moved toward the bed, Frank and Emma's father introduced themselves, shaking hands with the awkward solidarity of men, witnessing an emotional moment they didn't quite know how to navigate. Emma proudly opened a glitter-covered scrapbook on her lap. This is my cancer journey, she announced with the matter-of-factness that only children can manage when discussing the unthinkable. See, this was before I got sick. I had long hair then. She flipped through pages documenting her treatment, photos of her first day of chemotherapy, receiving blood transfusions, celebrating halfway day with hospital staff, losing her hair, trying on different scarves and hats. The visual chronicle of her illness was both heartbreaking and inspiring. And here, she said, turning to a newer page, this is when I met Sarah. She came to read to kids in the ward, but she sat with me the longest because I had so many questions about being a donor. The page held a photo of my daughter and Emma, heads bent together over a book, both smiling. Something tightened in my chest at the sight, pride and hurt tangled together in a complex knot. Sarah says you're a teacher, Emma continued, looking up at me with eyes too wise for her years. I want to be a teacher too, or maybe a vet. Sarah says I can be anything once I get better, and I'm going to get better now because of her. The absolute confidence in her voice was heartbreaking. This child had endured more pain in her short life than most adults, yet her hope remained undimmed. And my daughter, my secretive, manipulative, impossibly generous daughter, was the source of that hope. I think you'll be wonderful at whatever you choose, I told Emma, meaning it. As we continued looking through the scrapbook, I became aware of a conversation happening in low tones across the room between Frank, Dr. Mercer, and Emma's father. Their serious expressions sent a chill through me. "Mom," Sarah said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. "Look at the new page Emma made. It's about next week." The page was titled "My New Birthday" in Emma's childish handwriting. Below it were drawings of hospital beds, of Emma and Sarah connected by what looked like a rainbow, of a sun rising. "When I get Sarah's bone marrow," Emma explained, "it's like being born again with new blood. So it's my second birthday." The simplicity of her understanding, the profound hope in those crayon drawings, made the room blur through my tears. Dr. Mercer approached us, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Matthews, could I speak with you and your husband privately for a moment?" Sarah immediately tensed. "Is something wrong with the donation?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her. "Just some paperwork since your mother is now involved." I didn't believe him, and from Sarah's expression, neither did she. But Emma distracted her with questions about what she should wear for her new birthday, and we adults stepped out into the hallway. Once the door closed behind us, Dr. Mercer's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, there's something you should know that we've been discussing with the Porters. The timing is complicated." Frank moved closer to me, his presence suddenly reassuring rather than irritating. "What is it?" "Emma's latest blood work shows her condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. We need to move the transplant up to tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I repeated, the word feeling hollow in my mouth. "But Sarah has finals this week. She hasn't prepared for surgery, mentally or physically. There must be—" "Elaine," Frank interrupted gently. "This is life or death for Emma." The rebuke, soft as it was, stung all the more because he was right. My instinct to protect Sarah was butting up against the reality that another child's life hung in the balance. "Sarah will need to be admitted tonight," Dr. Mercer continued. "The procedure itself is relatively straightforward. We'll collect bone marrow from her hip under general anesthesia. Recovery takes about a week, with some pain and fatigue." "And the risks?" I asked, finding my teacher voice, the one that demanded clear answers. "For Sarah? Minimal. The most common complications are reaction to anesthesia, infection at the donation site, or longer than expected fatigue. For Emma," he hesitated, "even with the transplant, her prognosis is guarded. But without it, particularly with this acceleration in her condition," he didn't need to finish the sentence. "Without Sarah's donation, and quickly, Emma would die. I need to speak with Sarah," I said firmly. "Alone?" Dr. Mercer nodded. "Of course. I'll have a nurse bring her to the consultation room down the hall." As he walked away, Frank turned to me, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Elaine, you're not going to try to talk her out of this, are you? After all the preparation, all the testing, the assumption stung. Do you really think so little of me? That I would put my comfort above a child's life? No, That's exactly why you and Sarah kept this from me, isn't it? You both decided I was too fragile, too traumatized, too selfish to handle this." My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. "Did it ever occur to either of you that I might have wanted to support my daughter through one of the most significant decisions of her life?" Frank reached for me, but I stepped back. "We were wrong," he said simply. "I was wrong. I should have trusted your strength, not your fear." Before I could respond, a nurse approached with Sarah, whose expression was a mixture of confusion and worry. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" The nurse directed us to a small consultation room with uncomfortable chairs and generic landscapes on the walls. Once the door closed behind us, Sarah looked between us anxiously. "Is Emma okay?" Dr. Mercer wouldn't say anything. I took a deep breath, finding the calm I'd always been able to access in crisis. "Emma's condition is worsening. They need to do the transplant tomorrow, not next week." Sarah's eyes widened, but instead of fear, I saw determination flood her features. "Okay, so I'm being admitted tonight?" Her immediate acceptance, her courage in the face of accelerated surgery, made my heart swell with a complicated mixture of pride and sorrow. "Yes," I confirmed. "But Sarah, this is happening very quickly now. Are you sure?" "Mom," she interrupted, her voice steadier than I expected. "I've had months to think about this. I'm sure." I studied my daughter's face, seeing in it echoes of the little girl who had stood up to playground bullies, who had insisted on sleeping alone after nightmares because brave people face their fears, who had always possessed a moral compass that sometimes put my own to shame. "Then we'll be with you," I said simply. "Every step of the way." Relief washed over her features. Really? You're okay with this? I'm not okay with how I found out, I said honestly. I'm hurt that you and your father felt you needed to protect me from this. But am I okay with my daughter saving another child's life? Yes, Sarah. I'm more than okay with that. I'm in awe of you. She launched herself into my arms then, clinging to me with a fierceness that reminded me of when she was small and afraid. Over her shoulder, I met Frank's gaze. His eyes were wet with tears, his expression a mixture of relief and regret. I'm sorry, Mom, Sarah whispered against my neck. I'm so sorry we hurt you. I know, sweetheart, I replied, smoothing her hair as I had done thousands of times throughout her life. But right now, that's not what matters. What matters is that you're about to do something extraordinary, and you need to focus on that. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Will you stay with me tonight? At the hospital? The vulnerability in her question broke something open inside me. This nearly grown daughter still needed her mother, despite her independence, despite her attempts to protect me. Try and keep me away, I said, finding a smile despite the turmoil of emotions. Your father and I will both be here. Frank stepped forward then, embracing both of us. For a moment, we were a unit again, the Matthews family, facing a crisis together instead of separately. But as Sarah left to use the restroom, Frank turned to me with a gravity that sent another chill down my spine. There's something else Dr. Mercer told me, he said quietly. Something he didn't want to say in front of Sarah or the Porters. My heart sank. What is it? Even with the transplant, Emma's chances are... He swallowed hard. They're not good, Elaine. Maybe 30%. Sarah doesn't know. The Porters asked us not to tell her before the procedure. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My daughter was preparing to undergo surgery, to endure pain and recovery, for a little girl who might die anyway, and they wanted her to go into it without knowing the truth. More secrets, more protection, more well-intentioned deception. No, I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. No more lies, Frank, not even kind ones. Sarah deserves to know what she's really facing, not just the physical risks to herself, but the reality of Emma's prognosis. But the Porters are thinking of their daughter, as they should, but I'm thinking of ours. She's 17, Frank, old enough to make this decision, old enough to understand that sometimes our best isn't enough. If Emma doesn't make it, and Sarah finds out later that we all knew and didn't tell her, I couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of the choice pressed down on both of us. Tell Sarah the truth, and risk devastating her before a major medical procedure, or protect her with silence, and risk a deeper wound later. As Sarah returned, her face freshly washed but her eyes still red from crying, the decision crystallized for me. My daughter had made a choice to help another human being without any guarantee of success. She deserved the dignity of knowing exactly what that choice entailed. Sarah, I began, taking her hands in mine. There's something else we need to discuss before tomorrow. That night, as I sat in an uncomfortable recliner beside Sarah's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest in sleep, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The hospital sounds, beeping monitors, squeaking shoes on linoleum, murmured conversations in the hallway, that would normally have sent me spiraling into anxiety, instead grounded me in the present moment. Frank had gone to get coffee from the cafeteria, giving me a rare moment alone with my sleeping daughter. In the dim light, she looked younger than her 17 years, vulnerable in the thin hospital gown with an IV already started in preparation for tomorrow's procedure. Earlier, I had told her the truth about Emma's prognosis. Her face had crumpled momentarily before she'd squared her shoulders and nodded. I still want to do it, she'd said firmly. Even if it's only a 30% chance, that's better than no chance at all. Her certainty, her courage in the face of potential heartbreak, had humbled me. When had my child become this person of such moral clarity? While I'd been busy suspecting her father of infidelity, while I'd been caught up in the day-to-day tasks of maintaining our household, Sarah had been evolving into someone extraordinary, and I'd almost missed it. Dr. Mercer had come by an hour ago to explain the procedure again, this time to me as well as Sarah and Frank. He'd gone over the risks, the recovery process, the timeline for knowing whether the transplant was successful for Emma. Throughout his explanation, Sarah had asked intelligent, thoughtful questions that revealed she'd been researching bone marrow donation for months. You've really thought this through, I'd said after the doctor left. I had to, she'd replied simply. It's my body, my choice. I needed to understand exactly what I was offering. My body, my choice. Words I'd taught her in a different context years ago, now applied to this profound act of generosity, the student becoming the teacher. As I watched her sleep now, I thought of all the moments I'd missed in my hyper-vigilance about Frank, in my certainty that I needed to be the family's protector and moral center. How many conversations had Sarah and Frank shared without me? How many milestones in my daughter's emotional development had I been excluded from because they'd decided I was too fragile to handle them? The realization was painful, but with it came something unexpected: liberation. For years, I had defined myself primarily as a protector, a fixer, the strong one who handled crises while others faltered. It was a role I'd grown comfortable in, even as it isolated me. Now that identity was being challenged by my own daughter, who had made a decision of profound moral weight without my guidance or permission. Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct before settling again. I resisted the urge to smooth her hair back from her forehead, not wanting to wake her. She needed her rest before tomorrow's procedure. The door opened quietly, and Frank slipped in with 2 coffee cups. He handed me one before taking the second recliner on the other side of Sarah's bed. "Any change?" he whispered. I shook my head, sleeping peacefully. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the first easy quiet between us in longer than I could remember. Finally, Frank spoke again, his voice barely audible. I keep thinking about when she was born, how tiny she was, how terrified I was that I'd break her somehow. And I remembered that day with crystal clarity, the exhaustion, the joy, the overwhelming responsibility. You were afraid to change her diaper for the first 3 days. A soft chuckle. Her legs were so small, but you just knew what to do. You always did. I was terrified too, I admitted. I just didn't show it. Frank's gaze, visible in the dim light from the monitoring equipment, was thoughtful. That's the problem, isn't it? You never showed it. Your fear, your pain. You kept it all inside, until eventually, we stopped expecting you to have any. The observation, gentle as it was, hit with the force of truth. I'd been so determined to be strong for everyone else that I'd denied my own vulnerability until it became invisible even to those closest to me. I thought that was what you needed, I said softly. What both of you needed. Someone who could handle everything, who wouldn't fall apart. What we needed was you, Elaine. Not just your strength. All of you. The simplicity of his statement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them away, unwilling to indulge them even now. When did she grow up so much? I asked instead, looking at our sleeping daughter. When did she become this person who would undergo surgery for a child she barely knows? Frank's smile was sad. It's been happening right in front of us. Remember when she organized that fundraiser for her friend Zoe's mom's cancer treatment last year? Or when she spent her entire spring break building houses with that church group? I did remember, but I'd attributed those actions to typical teenage community service for college applications, not as evidence of the deeply compassionate person Sarah was becoming. I've been missing so much, I whispered, the realization painful. We both have, in different ways, Frank replied. I've been physically present, but emotionally elsewhere. You've been emotionally present, but so focused on holding everything together that you couldn't see what was right in front of you. His insight surprised me. In 22 years of marriage, I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a conversation with this level of honesty. When did you get so perceptive? I asked, only half joking. Driving Sarah to appointments these past few months has given us a lot of time to talk, he admitted. About everything. About us as a family. About you and me. A flicker of the old hurt returned. I wish I'd been included in those conversations. So do I, he said simply. That's on me, Elaine. I took the easy way out. Before I could respond, Sarah stirred again, this time opening her eyes. Mom? Dad? What time is it? I checked my watch. Just after midnight, sweetheart. You should go back to sleep. She pushed herself up against the pillows, suddenly looking alert. I had a dream about Emma. She was running through a field of sunflowers, her hair long again. She touched her own hair unconsciously. Do you think that's a sign? Frank and I exchanged glances, neither of us wanting to either stoke false hope or dampen her spirits. I think it's a sign that you care deeply about her, I said carefully. that your subconscious is focused on seeing her healthy again. Sarah nodded, accepting this interpretation. I'm not scared about tomorrow, she said, as if reading my thoughts. Not for myself anyway. The worst part will be waiting to see if it works for Emma. Whatever happens, Frank said, reaching for her hand. You've done a brave and selfless thing. Don't forget that. Your father's right, I added. The outcome for Emma isn't in your control. What matters is that you've given her a chance she wouldn't have had otherwise. Sarah looked between us, her expression pensive. I'm sorry we lied to you, Mom. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was underestimating you. We both were, Frank added quietly. I felt something shift within me at their apologies. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. The hurt was still there, but its sharp edges were softening. I haven't always made it easy for people to see beyond my strength, I acknowledged. Maybe I've been afraid to let you see when I'm scared or uncertain. Like you are now? Sarah asked perceptively. I met her gaze, allowing her to see the worry in my eyes. Yes, I'm terrified about tomorrow, about your recovery, about what this means for Emma. I'm proud of you beyond words, but I'm also scared, Sarah. Instead of being troubled by my admission, she seemed reassured. Good, she said with a small smile. That means you're really here with me, not just trying to make everything okay. Her insight struck me speechless. This child? No, this young woman had articulated exactly what had been missing in our relationship for years. My authentic presence, complete with fears and doubts, rather than just my protective competence. I'm here, I promised, reaching for her hand. All of me. Frank's hand covered both of ours, creating a circle of connection that felt more genuine than any interaction we'd shared in recent memory. Try to sleep a little more, I encouraged her. Tomorrow's a big day. She nodded, settling back against the pillows. Will you both stay? We're not going anywhere, Frank assured her. As Sarah drifted back to sleep, I felt something fundamental shifting within me. For years, I'd defined strength as the absence of vulnerability, as handling everything without showing strain. But watching my daughter face tomorrow's procedure with both courage and honest fear, I was beginning to understand that true strength might look very different than I'd imagined. Perhaps true strength was having the courage to be seen, fully, authentically, with all my fears and uncertainties alongside my capabilities. Perhaps by trying to protect everyone else from my vulnerability, I'd actually been protecting myself from the discomfort of being truly known. As the hospital settled into its midnight rhythm around us, I felt myself awakening to a new understanding of what it meant to be strong. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to be present with it. Not handling everything alone, but allowing others to share the burden. In a strange twist, my 17-year-old daughter was teaching me how to be brave, in a way I'd never mastered, not by suppressing her fears, but by acknowledging them and moving forward anyway. And as I sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair, holding my daughter's hand while she slept, I made a silent promise to myself. No more hiding behind my strength. No more shutting others out in the name of protection. It was time to allow myself to be fully seen, by my daughter, by my husband, and perhaps most importantly, by myself. Morning arrived with the relentless efficiency of hospital routines. Nurses checked vitals, an anesthesiologist visited to explain procedures, consent forms appeared requiring signatures. Through it all, Sarah maintained a calm that belied her years, answering questions with clarity and confidence, while Frank and I tried to mask our anxiety. As they prepared to take her to the operating room, Sarah asked for a moment alone with me. Frank stepped out, and my daughter reached for my hand. Mom, there's something in my overnight bag, a sealed envelope. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen, I interrupted, my protective instincts flaring. Mom, she said firmly, the anesthesiologist already explained there's a small risk, and while I'm not worried, I need you to know where that envelope is. It's important. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to respect her concerns rather than dismiss them. Okay, what's in it? Letters. One for you, one for Dad, one for Emma. Just in case. The thought of my daughter writing what amounted to final letters sent a chill through me, but I nodded. I'll make sure they're delivered if needed, but they won't be. And Mom? There's a flash drive too. The password is Grandpa's birthday. Now I was confused. What's on it? A A shadow crossed her face. Information. Things I found out. It's complicated. Just promise you'll look at it if something goes wrong today. Before I could press for details, the door opened and the transport team arrived to take Sarah to surgery. I kissed her forehead, promising to be there when she woke up, and watched as they wheeled her away, her expression serene despite the gravity of the moment. In the waiting room, Frank paced while I sat perfectly still, a study in contrasting anxiety responses. The surgeon had told us the procedure would take about 2 hours, followed by recovery time before we could see her. "What did Sarah want to talk to you about?" Frank asked, finally sitting beside me. I hesitated, unsure whether to share Sarah's contingency plans. "She left letters, just in case." Frank's face paled. "She doesn't think—" "No," I assured him quickly. "She's just being thorough. You know how she is?" He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "She's always been like you that way, preparing for every possibility." I almost mentioned the flash drive but held back. Something in Sarah's manner had suggested it was meant for me alone, at least initially, and after months of being excluded from their secrets, I felt entitled to keep one of my own for now. 2 hours stretched into 3 as we waited, making small talk with other families in the surgical waiting area, accepting coffee from well-meaning volunteers, checking our phones obsessively though there was no news to be had. Finally, Dr. Mercer appeared in scrubs, his surgical mask hanging around his neck. We both stood immediately, searching his expression for clues. "The procedure went well," he said without preamble. "We were able to harvest an excellent sample of bone marrow. Sarah is in recovery now and should be awake within the hour." Relief flooded through me so intensely that my knees weakened. Frank put an arm around my shoulders and I found myself leaning into him without thinking. "When can we see her?" he asked. "As soon as she's settled in her room. The nurse will come get you." Dr. Mercer's pager beeped, and he checked it with a slight frown. "I need to go. Emma's transplant is being prepared now. We'll keep you updated on both patients." As he hurried away, Frank and I sat back down, the tension draining from us in waves. "She's okay," I whispered, half to myself. "She's okay," Frank echoed, squeezing my hand. An hour later, we were led to Sarah's room. She was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but conscious and alert. Bandages covered the site on her hip where they had extracted the bone marrow, and an IV delivered pain medication and fluids. "Hey," she said weakly as we entered. "Did they tell you?" "It went well." I moved to her bedside, touching her face gently. "They did. How do you feel?" "Like someone drilled a hole in my hip," she said with a weak smile. "Because, they did. But the pain meds are pretty awesome." Frank laughed, the sound slightly choked with emotion. "That's my girl, always finding the silver lining." "Have they started Emma's transplant?" Sarah asked, suddenly serious. "Dr. Mercer said they were preparing it," I told her. "I'm sure they'll let us know when it's underway." Sarah nodded, her eyelids growing heavy. "I'm so tired. Is that normal?" "Completely normal," I assured her. "You've been through a lot. Rest now." As she drifted into sleep, Frank and I settled into the familiar hospital chairs on either side of her bed. The tableau was so similar to the night before, yet everything felt different. The acute anxiety replaced by a quieter concern. The uncertainty about the procedure now shifted to uncertainty about Emma's outcome. "I'm going to get us some food," Frank said after a while. "You probably haven't eaten since yesterday." I hadn't realized I was hungry until he mentioned it. "Thank you." As he left, I remembered Sarah's overnight bag, which the nurses had stowed in the small closet. Checking to make sure Sarah was still sleeping soundly, I retrieved it and found the envelope she'd mentioned, along with a small flash drive. The envelope was sealed, with "in case of emergency" written on the outside in Sarah's neat handwriting. I returned it to the bag, respecting her wishes that it only be opened if necessary. The flash drive, however, I slipped into my pocket, not to access now, but to keep safe until I could examine it privately. Frank returned with sandwiches and coffee, and we ate in companionable silence, watching our daughter sleep. The normalcy of sharing a meal together felt strangely profound after the emotional turbulence of the past 24 hours. "I've been thinking," Frank said finally, "about us, about how we got here." I set my coffee aside, giving him my full attention. "What do you mean? When did we start keeping secrets from each other, Elaine? Not just this thing with Sarah and Emma, but all of it. When did we stop talking?" The question hit at the heart of what had been troubling me. "I'm not sure. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe we both got so caught up in our roles, you as the provider, me as the caretaker, that we forgot how to be partners. He nodded slowly. I think I've been afraid of disappointing you. You're so capable, so sure of everything. Sometimes it feels like you don't need me at all. His vulnerability surprised me. I've always needed you, Frank. Maybe I haven't been good at showing it. And I haven't been good at being there when you do show it, he admitted. It's easier to retreat into work, into other distractions, than to face the ways I might fall short. The honesty between us felt fragile but precious, a tender new growth after a long winter. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Dr. Mercer entered, his expression unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, Emma's transplant is complete. The procedure went smoothly. Now we wait to see if her body accepts the new cells. How long until you know? I asked. We should see preliminary signs within a week. Full engraftment takes longer, about 3 to 4 weeks. Sarah stirred at the sound of voices, her eyes fluttering open. Emma? She asked immediately, her voice thick with sleep. Dr. Mercer stepped closer to her bed. The transplant is done. You did great, Sarah. The marrow sample was excellent quality. She smiled weakly. When can I see her? Not for a while, I'm afraid. Emma's immune system is essentially non-existent right now. She's in isolation to protect her from any potential infections. Sarah's face fell, but she nodded understanding. But I can talk to her? Video chat or something? Once she's feeling up to it, absolutely. He checked her vital signs displayed on the monitor. How's your pain? Scale of 1 to 10. 6, Sarah admitted. It was about 8 when I first woke up. I'll have the nurse increase your pain medication slightly. You should be more comfortable. After Dr. Mercer left, Sarah turned to me with an intensity that belied her weakened state. Mom, did you check my bag? I nodded, keeping my voice low though Frank was listening. I saw the envelope and the flash drive. Good. She glanced at her father, then back to me. I need to tell you both something. Frank moved closer to the bed, concern etched on his face. What is it, sweetheart? Sarah took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain the movement caused. I didn't just volunteer here because of Emma. I mean, she's the reason now, but not how it started. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. I came here looking for information about my biological father. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Frank's face went completely blank, while I felt as though the floor had dropped out from under me. What are you talking about? I managed finally, my voice barely audible. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I found the letters, Mom. Last year, when I was looking for my birth certificate for the driver's license application. They were in that old file box in the attic. Letters from someone named Michael Donovan, my real father. Frank had gone perfectly still beside me, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 21 years of carefully constructed security unraveling in an instant. Sarah, Frank is your father, I said automatically, the denial immediate and instinctive. She shook her head slightly. Biologically, he's not. The letters made that clear. You were already pregnant when you met him. Michael Donovan wanted to be part of my life, but you wouldn't let him. The clinical space around us seemed to contract, the beeping monitors and antiseptic smells fading as memories crashed through my carefully constructed walls. Michael, medical school, the whirlwind romance, the unexpected pregnancy, his insistence that he wasn't ready, my determination to manage alone, and then Frank, the kind business student who didn't care that I was carrying another man's child, who married me despite my complicated situation, who adopted Sarah legally and loved her as his own. You weren't supposed to find those, I whispered, the inadequacy of the response striking me even as I said it. Why did you keep them? Sarah asked, the question piercing in its simplicity. Why had I? As evidence? As a connection to a past I'd thought I'd left behind? I had no good answer. How long have you known? Frank asked, his voice steady but distant. Since last March. I found the letters, then started doing research. Michael Donovan is a doctor now. An oncologist, actually. He works at Rockport Memorial. The pieces suddenly clicked into place with nauseating clarity. Sarah hadn't chosen this hospital randomly for her volunteer work. She hadn't connected with Emma by chance. Dr. Mercer isn't just Emma's doctor, is he? I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah shook her head slightly. He's Michael's protege. He helped me find a way to meet my biological father without actually telling him who I was. Frank stood abruptly, walking to the window with his back to us. The rigid set of his shoulders conveyed his distress more clearly than words could have. "Does he know?" I asked. "Michael?" "No," Sarah said. "At least I don't think so. I've been volunteering in the pediatric oncology ward for months, seeing him almost every day, but I've never told him who I am. I was working up the courage when I met Emma and everything changed." The revelation was staggering. My daughter had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to connect with her biological father, all while Frank and I remained oblivious. The magnitude of her deception, matched only by the magnitude of our own, left me breathless. "What's on the flash drive?" I asked, remembering the small device in my pocket. "Research, medical records, family history." She glanced at Frank's back, then lowered her voice. "Medical history is important, Mom. I needed to know if there were any conditions in his family I should be aware of. And," she hesitated, and I thought you should know that he's been looking for me. For years. There are emails, forum posts, private investigator reports. He never stopped trying to find me, even after you told him to stay away." Each word was like a physical blow. The past I'd thought safely buried was rising up with terrible force, threatening everything I'd built in the intervening years. Frank turned back to face us, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes were red-rimmed. "Why now, Sarah? Why bring all this up now?" She met his gaze steadily, showing a courage that humbled me. "Because I'm donating bone marrow to save a little girl's life, and medical history matters. Because I'm tired of the secrets in this family. Because you're my dad in every way that counts. But I have a right to know where I came from." Her voice broke slightly. "And because what if I need a transplant someday? What if I need a genetically related donor? Shouldn't I know who might be able to save my life?" The practical wisdom in her reasoning was undeniable, but beneath it was a deeper truth. Sarah had been searching for her identity, for the missing pieces of her story, just as Frank and I had been searching for our way back to each other. "I'm sorry," I said finally, the words wholly inadequate, but all I had to offer. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought knowing would only hurt you. Just like I thought knowing about Emma and the hospital would only hurt you," Sarah replied softly. "We've all been protecting each other so much that we've built walls instead of bridges. From the mouth of my child, wisdom that cut to the heart of our family's dysfunction. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Frank's hurt, my shame, Sarah's tentative hope for understanding. Finally, Frank crossed back to the bed and took Sarah's hand. "You will always be my daughter," he said firmly. "Nothing changes that. Not biology. Not these secrets. Nothing." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I know, Dad. I've never doubted that." He turned to me then, his expression complex. "We have a lot to talk about, Elaine. But not here. Not now. Sarah needs to rest and heal." I nodded, grateful for the reprieve even as I recognized the reckoning that lay ahead. "You're right. This can wait." Sarah's eyes were growing heavy again, the pain medication taking effect. "The flash drive," she murmured. "Promise you'll look at it, Mom. Both of you." "We will," I assured her, tucking the blanket more securely around her. "Rest now." As she drifted back to sleep, Frank and I exchanged a long look across her bed, a look that contained 2 decades of shared history, of love and mistakes and secrets finally coming to light. Whatever happened next, the careful facade of our family life had been irrevocably altered. The truth was finally emerging, painful and necessary as a surgeon's knife. 3 days passed in the strange, suspended animation of hospital time. Endless hours of monitoring, medication schedules, brief walks in the hallway as Sarah regained her strength. Frank and I took shifts staying with her, maintaining a careful cordiality that didn't touch our deeper issues. The flash drive remained in my pocket, a small weight with enormous implications. On the evening of the 3rd day, Sarah was asleep after a physical therapy session that had left her exhausted but proud of her progress. Frank had gone home to shower and change clothes, leaving me alone in the room with my thoughts and my daughter's secrets. I removed the flash drive from my pocket, turning it over in my fingers. Sarah had said the password was my father's birthday, a date with significance only to our immediate family. Whatever was on this drive, she had intended it to remain private. My laptop was in my bag. I could look now, prepare myself before Frank returned. After a moment's hesitation, I connected the drive and entered my father's birth date when prompted. 05171943. The drive contained a single folder labeled Heritage. Inside were dozens of neatly organized subfolders: medical history, education, career, family tree, correspondence, and legal. My daughter had been thorough in her investigation, methodical in a way that reminded me painfully of myself. I started with medical history, finding a detailed document listing conditions in Michael Donovan's family: heart disease on his father's side, breast cancer in his mother and aunt, a cousin with multiple sclerosis. Information that could indeed be life-saving for Sarah someday. Information I should have sought years ago. The family tree folder contained photographs of people who shared my daughter's features: Michael's mother with the same high cheekbones, his father with identical deep-set eyes, a sister whose smile was eerily similar to Sarah's, strangers who were blood relatives to my child, connections I had denied her. In correspondence, I found what Sarah had mentioned: years of emails, forum posts on adoption search sites, letters to private investigators, Michael's increasingly desperate attempts to locate the daughter he'd initially rejected, but had later sought to know. His most recent effort dated just 6 months ago. I was still staring at the screen, overwhelmed by the evidence of my decades-long deception, when the door opened and Frank entered. He looked refreshed from his shower, but the shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "She's still sleeping?" he asked quietly. I nodded, closing my laptop. The physical therapy tired her out. He settled into the chair opposite mine, the familiar configuration of our hospital vigil. "Were you looking at it? The flash drive?" "Yes." There seemed no point in hiding it. "And?" I met his gaze directly. "It's extensive. Sarah's been researching Michael Donovan for months. Medical history, family background, his career, and evidence that he's been looking for her for years." Frank's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'm not surprised. She's your daughter. Thorough, methodical." The acknowledgement of Sarah's connection to me, not genetic, but behavioral, was both a kindness and a subtle reminder of the lies between us. Frank had always known Sarah wasn't his biological child, had legally adopted her as an infant, but we had agreed never to tell her, to raise her as ours without qualification. Another well-intentioned deception crumbling under the weight of truth. "We need to talk about this," I said quietly. "About what happens next." "What do you think happens next, Elaine?" There was no anger in his voice, only a weary resignation that was somehow worse. "Sarah knows the truth. She's been in contact with his colleague working in his department. It seems inevitable that she'll want to meet him officially." The thought sent a chill through me, though I'd had days to consider it. "And if she does, then we support her." Frank's answer was immediate and certain. "She's 17, nearly an adult. We can't stop her, and trying would only push her away." His reasonableness was disarming. I had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even an ultimatum. Instead, he was approaching the situation with the same steady practicality that had drawn me to him all those years ago. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate, but necessary, "for keeping those letters, for not being honest with you about how Michael kept trying to contact us over the years." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you keep them, Elaine?" The truth. The question cut to the heart of something I'd never fully examined myself. "I don't know," I admitted. Maybe as evidence if he ever tried to claim legal rights. Maybe because they were part of Sarah's history, something she might want someday. Or maybe, I hesitated, forcing myself toward a more uncomfortable truth. Maybe I kept them because some part of me never fully closed that door. The admission hung between us, more damning than any evidence on the flash drive. "Not because you still had feelings for him," Frank clarified, his voice carefully neutral, "but because you never completely let yourself trust that I would stay." The insight struck with painful accuracy. "Yes," I whispered. "I think that's it exactly. After 22 years, Elaine, after I adopted Sarah, after I helped raise her, after I built a life with you, you still kept an escape hatch, just in case. Put that way, my actions seemed not just hurtful, but cruel. I didn't think of it that way." "No, you wouldn't have." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You've been preparing for abandonment your whole life. Your father's illness, your mother's emotional distance afterward, Michael rejecting you when you got pregnant. You've been waiting for me to leave too. The psychoanalysis might have angered me coming from anyone else, but from Frank, who had lived with me, loved me, watched me build walls even as we shared a home. It carried the ring of truth. "And so you kept your distance emotionally," I said, connecting the dots. "Because you could feel me holding back." It was easier than continually trying to prove myself. The admission seemed to cost him, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Especially these last few years, as Sarah got older and needed us less. I kept waiting for you to turn toward me, to finally believe I wasn't going anywhere. Instead, you started suspecting me of affairs. The dysfunctional pattern of our marriage lay exposed between us. My fear of abandonment creating distance, his withdrawal in response reinforcing my insecurity, both of us spiraling further apart while maintaining the external appearance of a solid partnership. Where does this leave us?" I asked finally. Before Frank could answer, Sarah stirred, her eyes blinking open. She took in our serious expressions with immediate understanding. "You looked at the flash drive," she said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded. "We were just discussing it." She pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing slightly at the movement. "And?" Frank and I exchanged glances, a silent negotiation about who would respond. He nodded slightly, ceding the conversation to me. "And we think that if you want to meet Michael officially, we'll support you," I said, the words difficult but necessary. "We should probably involve a family therapist to help navigate the process. But we won't stand in your way." Relief flooded her features. "Really? You're not angry?" "We're hurt," Frank corrected gently. "That you felt you needed to go behind our backs. That you've been carrying this alone for months. But not angry, no. There's something else," I added, the decision crystallizing even as I spoke. "If you're going to meet Michael, I need to see him first. Alone. There are things he and I need to discuss before he meets you as his daughter." Sarah studied my face, her expression cautious. "What things?" 21 years of history. Explanations I owe him. Boundaries that need to be established. I reached for her hand. "This isn't just about you and Michael, Sarah. It's about all of us. How we move forward as a family, with or without his involvement in our lives." She seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "That seems fair. But soon, okay? I don't want to keep pretending when I see him in the hospital. Soon, I promised. As soon as you're well enough that I feel comfortable leaving you for a few hours." As if on cue, a nurse entered to check Sarah's vitals. The conversation paused as she recorded measurements, adjusted medication, and asked about pain levels. When she left, the intimate atmosphere had shifted. The moment for deep revelations passed. "Have you heard anything about Emma?" Sarah asked, changing the subject with the resilience of youth. "Dr. Mercer stopped by while you were sleeping," Frank told her. "Her body is showing early signs of accepting the transplant. It's very preliminary but positive." Sarah's face lit up with hope. "Really? That's amazing." Her genuine joy at this news, despite her own pain and the emotional turbulence of our conversation, reminded me again of her extraordinary capacity for compassion. Whatever mistakes Frank and I had made in our marriage, in our parenting, we had somehow raised a daughter with a moral compass that put ours to shame. "They're still being cautious," I reminded her gently. "It's very early days." "I know," she acknowledged. "But it's something, right? A reason to hope?" Hope. Such a simple concept, yet one I realized I'd been withholding from myself for years. Hope that Frank truly loved me for myself. Hope that our family could weather honesty as well as it had weathered secrets. Hope that there might be healing on the other side of this painful reckoning. "Yes," I agreed, looking at Frank as I spoke. "It's definitely a reason to hope." Later that night, after Sarah had fallen asleep again, and Frank had gone to the cafeteria for coffee, I made a decision. Taking out my phone, I opened the hospital directory I'd downloaded and searched for Donovan Michael. His extension appeared on the screen, along with office hours and credentials. Before I could reconsider, I typed a simple text message. "This is Elaine Matthews. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., hospital cafeteria. It's about Sarah." I pressed send before I could lose my nerve, then deleted the message from my phone. No more secrets, but I would control how this particular truth emerged. For once, I would face my past directly, instead of building walls to keep it at bay. Frank returned with the coffee, settling back into his chair with the newspaper. Across from him, I felt a strange sense of calm. For 22 years, I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the facade of our family to crumble. Now that it had, I found myself oddly liberated. The worst had happened, and yet we were still here, still talking, still functioning, still finding our way forward together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges when I faced Michael after all these years. But tonight, watching my husband read the newspaper while our daughter slept between us, I allowed myself to feel something I'd been guarding against for decades: hope. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at 2 o'clock, caught in the lull between lunch and dinner service. I'd chosen a corner table with good sightlines to the entrance, a cup of cooling tea before me as I waited. Frank was with Sarah, both aware of where I was and why. No more secrets, no more protection. I recognized Michael immediately when he entered, though 21 years had passed since we'd last seen each other. His dark hair was now salted with gray, crow's feet framed his eyes, but his tall, lanky frame and purposeful stride were unchanged. He scanned the cafeteria, spotted me, and froze momentarily before approaching. "Elaine," he said, the single word carrying 2 decades of complicated history. "Your message was unexpected. Thank you for coming," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please, sit." He complied, his movements cautious as if approaching a wild animal. In a way, that's what I had been: defensive, protective, keeping him at bay to preserve what I'd built with Frank and Sarah. "You said this is about Sarah," he began, leaning forward slightly. "Is she your patient? I don't recall seeing that name on our roster, but the pediatric oncology ward can be—" "She's our bone marrow donor," I interrupted. "For Emma Porter, Sarah Matthews. She's 17. I watched comprehension dawn on his face. The math, the timing, the name. "She's—" he started, then stopped, as if afraid to voice the conclusion he'd reached. "Your biological daughter, yes." The words felt strange in my mouth after decades of silence, but also oddly freeing. Though legally she's Frank's, he adopted her as an infant. Michael paled, his physician's composure cracking. "She's here? In this hospital? She donated bone marrow? 3 days ago. She's recovering well." I took a sip of tea to steady myself. "She knows who you are. She's known for almost a year." His eyes widened. "How?" "She found your letters. The ones you sent over the years, trying to establish contact. Letters you never answered," he said, a hint of the old anger surfacing. 20 years of reaching out, Elaine. 20 years of silence." I nodded, accepting the rebuke. I thought I was protecting her, protecting the family we'd built. From me? Her own father? From confusion, from divided loyalties, from the man who told me to take care of it when I told him I was pregnant. The old hurt rose up, surprising me with its intensity after all this time. Michael flinched. I was 24, in the middle of medical school, panicking. What I said was unforgivable, I know that, but I tried to make it right, Elaine. I tried for years. After I'd already moved on, I pointed out. After Frank had stepped up and become her father in every way that matters. "I'm not trying to replace him," Michael said, his voice softening. "I just wanted to know my daughter, to have some place in her life, however small." The sincerity in his voice was difficult to discount. This wasn't the arrogant medical student I'd known, but a middle-aged man who had spent decades reaching for a connection I'd denied him. "Sarah has been volunteering in pediatric oncology for months," I told him, "working alongside Jason Mercer, who I understand is your protege." Shock registered on his features. "Sarah Matthews. Of course. The high school volunteer who's been so good with the patients. I've seen her, spoken with her." His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. "She knew who I was the whole time?" "Yes. She engineered the whole thing to get close to you without revealing herself." He gave a surprised laugh, tinged with admiration. "She must get that strategic mind from you." "She gets a lot of things from me," I agreed. "And some things from you as well. She has your eyes." A complicated mix of emotions crossed his face. Pride, regret, longing. "Why are you telling me this now, Elaine? After all these years of silence?" I took a deep breath, centering myself for the difficult conversation ahead. "Because Sarah wants to meet you officially, as your daughter. And before that happens, you and I need to establish some ground rules." "Ground rules," he repeated, his expression guarded. "Michael, for 17 years, Frank has been Sarah's father in every way that matters. He taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, sat through dance recitals and soccer games. He was there for every high fever, every nightmare, every milestone. That doesn't change because she now knows you're her biological father. He nodded slowly. I understand that. Do you? Because I need to be absolutely clear. If you come into her life, it's on our terms. Frank's and mine. You don't get to sweep in after 17 years and start making parental decisions or undermining our authority. I would never... Let me finish, I said firmly. Sarah is at a vulnerable age. She's just undergone a significant medical procedure. She's processing major revelations about her identity, and she's facing college decisions in the coming year. If you want a relationship with her, it needs to be supportive and respectful of the family structure she's grown up with. Michael considered this, his expression thoughtful, rather than defensive. What exactly are you proposing? Supervised visits initially. Frank and I would be present. As trust builds, that could change. No overnight stays or trips until she's 18 and can make those decisions herself. Transparency about all communication. No secrets, no private arrangements. You've thought this through, he observed. I've had 3 days to prepare while sitting beside my daughter's hospital bed, I replied evenly. 3 days to come to terms with the fact that the careful structure I built to protect her has already been dismantled by her own investigation. Michael was quiet for a moment, studying me with the assessing gaze of a physician. You're different, Elaine? Harder somehow. I've spent 17 years being a mother. It changes you. And what does Frank think about all this? The question was reasonable, but still felt like an intrusion. Frank supports whatever is best for Sarah. He's secure in his relationship with her. Unlike you, Michael observed shrewdly. You're afraid I'll take her from you somehow. The insight struck uncomfortably close to my deepest fear. I'm concerned about the impact of this revelation on her emotional well-being. And yes, on our family dynamics. Have you considered that this might ultimately strengthen your family? That honesty might be healthier than secrets? I bristled at being lectured about honesty by the man whose rejection had set this whole situation in motion. Rich coming from someone who initially wanted nothing to do with his child. Michael's face flushed, but he didn't rise to the bait. I made a terrible mistake when I was young and scared. I've spent 20 years trying to make amends for it. But at least I've been consistent in my desire to know her for the past 2 decades. Can you say the same about your commitment to honesty? The question stung, because it contained a kernel of truth. I had been the one maintaining the deception, keeping his letters, allowing Sarah to believe a version of her origins that wasn't accurate. Before I could respond, a familiar voice interrupted us. Mom? I turned to find Sarah standing at the entrance to the cafeteria, pale but determined, leaning slightly on Frank, who stood supportively at her side. My heart sank. This wasn't how I'd planned this confrontation to unfold. Sarah, you should be resting, I said automatically, rising from my chair. I couldn't wait, she replied simply, her gaze fixed on Michael, who had also stood, his expression a mixture of shock and wonder. Not anymore. Michael seemed frozen, staring at the daughter he'd never known. Sarah, he breathed, the name clearly holding new significance for him. Frank guided Sarah to our table, his arm steady around her waist. She insisted, he explained quietly to me. I thought it better to help her than have her try on her own. Sarah eased into a chair, her movements careful, but determined. Up close, the resemblance between her and Michael was startling. The same deep-set eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. Dr. Donovan, she said formally, though her voice trembled slightly. Or should I call you Michael? Or... She hesitated, glancing at Frank. I don't know the protocol here. Michael is fine, he said gently, resuming his seat. I don't quite know what to say. I've imagined this moment for so long. So have I, Sarah admitted. Since I found the letters. Since I realized who you were. An awkward silence fell, the weight of 2 decades of separation and secrets sitting heavily between them. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of support and restraint. This was Sarah's moment, not mine to control. Thank you, Michael said finally, his voice thick with emotion. For what you did for Emma. It was extraordinary. It was the right thing to do, Sarah replied simply. Anyone would have done it. No, he contradicted gently. Most people wouldn't. It takes a special kind of courage and compassion. He glanced at me, then at Frank. You've raised an extraordinary young woman. The acknowledgement, directed at both of us, was unexpected and disarming. This wasn't the confrontation I had anticipated, the battle for influence I had feared. Instead, it felt more like a cautious first step toward something new and undefined. "I have questions," Sarah said, her directness another trait she shared with me. "A lot of them." "I'm sure you do," Michael acknowledged. "I'll answer anything you want to know, as honestly as I can." Frank squeezed my shoulder, a silent reminder of our agreement to let Sarah lead this process. I forced myself to remain quiet, to resist the urge to control the narrative. "Why didn't you want me?" Sarah asked, the bluntness of the question making me wince. "When Mom told you she was pregnant," Michael didn't flinch from the difficult question. "Because I was young, selfish, and terrified. I was in the middle of medical school, drowning in debt and pressure. When your mother told me she was pregnant, all I could think about was how it would derail everything I'd worked for." He paused, his expression pained. "It was the worst mistake of my life, and I've spent 20 years regretting it." "But you changed your mind," Sarah prompted. "You sent letters, tried to find me." He nodded. "By the time I realized what I'd thrown away, your mother had already moved on. She'd met Frank, built a new life. She didn't answer my calls or letters." He looked at me without accusation. "I understand why now, though it was hard to accept then. I thought I was protecting our family," I said softly. "I was wrong to keep those letters from you, Sarah, to make that decision for you. We were all wrong in different ways," Frank added unexpectedly. "Your mother for keeping the letters, me for agreeing to the deception, Dr. Donovan for his initial rejection, you for going behind our backs this past year." He looked around the table, including all of us in his gaze. "Maybe it's time we stop focusing on past mistakes and start figuring out how to move forward." His wisdom cut through the tension, offering a path beyond recrimination. Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing it gratefully, while continuing to study Michael's face as if memorizing his features. "I'd like that," she said finally, moving forward. She turned to me, her expression resolute. "But no more secrets, Mom. No more protection. I need the truth, even when it's complicated or painful." The echo of our conversation from days earlier, her exact same request, struck me forcibly. My daughter had been telling me what she needed all along. I just hadn't been listening. "No more secrets," I agreed. "I promise." Michael looked between us cautiously. "So, what happens now?" Frank answered before I could. "Now, Sarah continues to recover from her procedure. You and Elaine finish the conversation you were having before we interrupted, and when Sarah is discharged, we'll figure out what comes next. Together, as a family." He emphasized the last word, staking his claim even as he acknowledged Michael's biological connection. Sarah nodded, already looking tired from the short excursion. "I should go back to my room. The physical therapist is coming at 3. "I'll take you," Frank offered, helping her to her feet. She turned to Michael before leaving. Will you come see me later? We could talk more, if you want." The vulnerability in her question made her seem younger than her 17 years. Michael nodded, visibly moved. "I'd like that very much." As Frank guided Sarah from the cafeteria, Michael and I were left alone again. The dynamic between us irrevocably altered. "You have a remarkable husband," he observed quietly. "I'm not sure I could be that generous in his position. Frank has always been secure in who he is," I acknowledged. "It's one of his greatest strengths. And one of yours is fierce protection of those you love," Michael added, "even when it leads you to make difficult choices." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like Sarah's that it startled me. "I'm not here to disrupt your family, Elaine. I just want a chance to know my daughter." The sincerity in his voice was impossible to discount. This wasn't about winning or control. It was about connection, about healing a 20-year-old wound. "Then we'll find a way to make that happen," I said finally, "on terms that work for everyone, especially Sarah." As we continued our conversation, outlining a tentative framework for future interactions, I felt something shift within me. The rigid control I'd maintained for so long giving way to a more flexible, honest approach. The walls I'd built to protect my family hadn't ultimately kept out pain or conflict. They'd just postponed the inevitable reckoning. But perhaps that reckoning, painful as it was, offered an opportunity for something new to emerge. A more authentic family structure based on truth rather than protection, on shared vulnerability rather than defensive strength. For Sarah's sake, for all our sakes, I was finally ready to try. 6 months later, I stood in our backyard, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The maple trees were ablaze with autumn color, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Inside the house, voices and laughter spilled from the open windows, Sarah's 18th birthday celebration in full swing. So much had changed since that day in the hospital cafeteria. Sarah had recovered fully from the bone marrow donation, returned to school for her senior year, and was now fielding college acceptance letters. Emma Porter was in remission, her body having accepted Sarah's cells with what Dr. Mercer called remarkable compatibility. The two had formed a bond that transcended their medical connection, with Sarah still volunteering at the hospital whenever her schedule allowed. Frank and I had entered couples therapy, finally confronting the patterns of protection and distance that had eroded our marriage over the years. The work was difficult, often painful, but necessary. We were learning to be honest with each other, to share our fears instead of armoring ourselves against them. Some days were better than others, but we were both committed to the process, and Michael had become a carefully integrated presence in our lives. True to his word, he had respected our boundaries, never pushing for more than what we were comfortable giving. He and Sarah met weekly for lunch, building a relationship that was uniquely their own. He attended her debate tournaments and soccer games, sitting separately from us at first, then gradually joining our family group as tensions eased. Today marked the first time we had included him in a family celebration, a step that felt significant to all of us. Watching through the kitchen window, I could see him now, deep in conversation with Sarah about her college options, his animated gestures so similar to hers that it sometimes took my breath away. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Frank's voice interrupted my reverie as he joined me on the patio, handing me a glass of wine. "Just reflecting," I replied, accepting the glass gratefully, "on how much has changed." He followed my gaze to where Sarah and Michael were talking, then to the corner where Emma sat with her parents, her hair growing back in soft curls after the harsh treatments, her cheeks showing healthy color for the first time in years. "Good changes," Frank observed quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "Hard, but good." He slipped an arm around my waist, a casual intimacy that had been gradually returning to our relationship. "You know what I realized the other day? I haven't seen you check my phone or question where I've been in months." I felt a flush of embarrassment, but acknowledged the truth in his observation. "And you've stopped working late unnecessarily or avoiding difficult conversations." "Progress," he said with a small smile. "Slow but steady." Inside, Sarah caught my eye through the window and gestured for us to join them. As we moved toward the house, Frank paused. "Are you okay with all of this, Elaine? Truly? Michael being here? Becoming part of our extended family circle?" The question deserved honest consideration. 6 months ago, I would have said no without hesitation, viewing any inclusion of Michael as a threat to what Frank and I had built. Now, I found myself nodding. I am. He's part of who Sarah is. Denying that was hurting her, even if I couldn't see it. Frank studied my face, perhaps looking for traces of the defensive protectiveness that had characterized me for so long. "You've changed too, you know. You're softer somehow, more open. Nearly losing everything has a way of shifting your perspective," I admitted. "I spent so many years afraid of what would happen if I let my guard down, if I acknowledged the complications in our lives. I thought I was being strong for everyone, but really, I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked gently. "Of not being enough, of being abandoned, of the messy, complicated reality of family." I met his gaze directly. "I thought if I controlled everything tightly enough, if I managed every potential threat, I could ensure we'd stay intact. But that control was an illusion, and it was costing us the authentic connection we could have had all along." Frank's expression softened with understanding. "And now? Now I'm learning that real strength isn't in control or walls or secrets. It's in vulnerability, in honesty, in facing difficulties together instead of trying to shield everyone from them." I glanced at Sarah through the window, her face animated as she spoke with Michael and Emma. Our daughter taught me that, when she chose to donate her bone marrow knowing the risks, knowing Emma's chances were uncertain. That was true courage, not the absence of fear, but action in the face of it. The door slid open, and Sarah leaned out. "Mom, Dad, Emma wants to show everyone her latest scans. She brought them as a kind of birthday gift for me." The pure joy in our daughter's voice was something I hadn't heard in years, not since she was a child, before adolescence brought self-consciousness, before secrets created distance between us. Inside, Emma was proudly displaying her medical images on her tablet, pointing out what Dr. Mercer had shown her family, clear evidence that her body was producing healthy new blood cells, that the cancer was in retreat, that Sarah's gift was quite literally giving her new life. "See these markers?" Emma explained with the expertise of someone who had become fluent in her own medical condition. "They're showing that the new marrow is fully engrafted. My body thinks Sarah's cells are mine now." "Because they are," Michael added, his physician's knowledge adding weight to the moment. "That's the miracle of transplantation. Two separate people, their cells becoming one functioning system." The metaphor wasn't lost on any of us. In our own way, we were attempting something similar, integrating Michael into our family system without rejection, without harm to what already existed. "I have something else to share," Sarah announced, her expression suddenly serious. "I've made my decision about college." This was news to all of us. She had been weighing options for weeks, torn between schools that offered different advantages. "I've accepted the offer from Georgetown," she said. "Their pre-med program is excellent, and they have strong connections to research hospitals. I want to specialize in oncology, maybe even pediatric oncology like Michael." The room fell silent. This was the first time Sarah had referred to Michael by name instead of Dr. Donovan in a family setting. The significance wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Michael himself, whose eyes widened slightly before a careful smile settled on his features. "Pre-med?" Frank echoed, recovering first. "When did you decide on medicine?" Sarah's gaze moved from Frank to me, then to Michael, and finally rested on Emma. "I think I've been moving toward it for months, but watching Emma's recovery process made it clear. I want to help people the way Dr. Mercer and Michael do. I want to save lives." Pride swelled in my chest, alongside a bittersweet recognition that my daughter was charting a course inspired partly by the biological father she'd only recently come to know. But there was no jealousy in the feeling, no sense of competition or loss, only wonder at the remarkable young woman she had become. "You'll be extraordinary," I said, meaning it completely. Emma's mother, Diane, wiped away tears. "You already are. You gave our family a second chance." She reached for her daughter's hand. "Emma's oncologist says her prognosis is now excellent. 90% chance of long-term remission. The Porter-Matthews compatibility is remarkable," Michael added, his professional demeanor softened by evident emotion. "One of the most successful transplants I've seen in 20 years of practice." Sarah beamed, but with a humility that reflected her understanding of the gravity of what had transpired. "I just provided the cells. Emma did the hard part, fighting every day. Like mother, like daughter," Frank said quietly, his hand finding mine. "Always deflecting credit, always seeing strength in others before acknowledging it in themselves." His observation caught me off guard, not because it was inaccurate, but because it highlighted a quality in Sarah I hadn't recognized as coming from me. I'd always focused on the physical traits she'd inherited from Michael, the intellectual curiosities they shared. But her moral compass, her instinct to lift others up, those were values Frank and I had modeled throughout her life. "Georgetown is only a 2-hour drive," Sarah continued, addressing all of us now. "I can come home on weekends sometimes, and for holidays. And maybe," she hesitated, glancing at Michael, "maybe you could show me around the medical school there sometime. Since you did your residency at their teaching hospital?" "I'd be honored," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Though I should warn you, they've renovated most of the facilities since my time. State-of-the-art everything now." "Even better," Sarah said with a grin. As the conversation continued around me, I felt a strange sense of peace settling in my chest. For so long I'd feared this exact scenario. Sarah connecting with Michael, finding similarities, building a relationship independent of my influence. I'd imagined it would feel like losing her, like watching part of our family structure crumble. Instead, I was witnessing something completely different, an expansion, not a diminishment. Sarah wasn't replacing Frank with Michael, wasn't rejecting our family narrative for his. She was integrating all parts of her history into a more complete understanding of herself. Emma's father raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to Sarah on her 18th birthday. Thank you for your courage, your generosity, and for showing us all what family truly means." "To Sarah," everyone echoed, glasses lifted. My daughter blushed, uncomfortable with the attention yet clearly moved. "I should be thanking all of you," she said. "Mom and Dad, for supporting me through everything, even when I went behind your backs. Michael, for being patient and understanding while we all figured this out. And Emma, for being brave enough to accept help from a stranger." "Not a stranger," Emma corrected with the directness of youth. "Family. Different kind, maybe, but still family." The wisdom in her simple statement brought fresh tears to my eyes. Family wasn't just biological connection or legal ties. It was chosen bonds, shared experiences, mutual support through hardship. Later, as the party wound down and guests began departing, I found myself alone with Sarah in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher in companionable silence. "You've been quiet," she observed, handing me a plate. "Are you okay with my college decision? With pre-med?" I took the plate, considering my response carefully. "I'm more than okay with it. I'm incredibly proud. It's just what? I'm realizing how much I missed by trying to control everything so tightly, by thinking I needed to protect you from complications, from pain." I placed the plate in the dishwasher, buying time to compose my thoughts. "You made this enormous decision, donating bone marrow, pursuing medicine, without my guidance. You made it beautifully, with more compassion and moral clarity than I managed in twice as many years." Sarah leaned against the counter, studying me. "I learned those values from you and Dad, though. You taught me to stand up for what's right, to help others, to be strong during difficult times. We taught you the principles," I acknowledged, "but you applied them with a courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age, or maybe ever." She considered this, her expression thoughtful. "You know what the hardest part of all this was? Not the medical procedures or meeting Michael or even keeping secrets. It was watching you struggle with letting go, with accepting that you couldn't control everything to keep me safe. The insight was startling in its accuracy. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time I realized my parents were just people, complicated, flawed, trying their best." She smiled to soften the observation. "I don't need you to be perfect, Mom. I just need you to be real." I pulled her into a hug, marveling at how this child I'd once carried had become someone who could carry wisdom of her own. "I'm trying," I whispered against her hair. "I know," she said simply. "That's enough." From the doorway, Frank cleared his throat gently. "Michael's leaving. He wanted to say goodbye to both of you." We joined them in the foyer, where Michael was pulling on his coat. The awkwardness that had characterized our early interactions had gradually given way to a careful courtesy, and now to something approaching genuine respect. "Thank you for including me today," he said, his gaze encompassing all of us. "It means more than I can express." "We're glad you could be here," Frank replied, extending his hand. The two men shook, a simple gesture that symbolized how far we'd all come. Michael turned to Sarah. "I'll call you next week about that campus tour? Maybe over spring break?" "I'd like that," she agreed. "And I want to stop by the hospital tomorrow to see Emma's new treatment protocol, if that's okay." "She'd love that." He hesitated, then added, "I'm so proud of you, Sarah, not just for your college decision or for helping Emma, but for how you've handled everything, with grace and maturity beyond your years." Sarah hugged him, the gesture still new enough to catch him by surprise before he returned the embrace. Over her shoulder, his eyes met mine, not challenging, not possessive, just acknowledging the extraordinary young woman we had both, in different ways, helped to shape. After Michael left, the three of us, Frank, Sarah, and I, stood in the foyer together, the core family unit that had weathered so much in the past 6 months. "Some birthday," Frank observed wryly, "college decisions, medical career plans, blended family dynamics. 18 is looking pretty grown up." Sarah laughed. "Don't worry, I still need you guys. Georgetown tuition isn't going to pay itself." We laughed together, the tension of the day dissolving into familiar family banter. As Sarah headed upstairs to call friends, Frank turned to me. "You know what I was thinking watching you with Michael tonight?" he asked. "That it's a miracle I didn't poison his birthday cake?" I suggested with a small smile. "That you finally let go of the fear," he said seriously. "The fear that's been driving you for as long as I've known you. Fear of abandonment, of not being enough, of losing what matters most." I considered his observation. "Maybe not completely let go," I admitted, "but I'm learning to live with it rather than be controlled by it. To trust that what's meant to stay will stay, not because I've managed to prevent every threat, but because it's built on something real. Like us? He asked quietly. Like us, I confirmed, reaching for his hand. 22 years, Frank. Through secrets and lies and fears and now truth. We're still standing. We're still standing, he agreed, pulling me close. That night, as Frank slept beside me, I found myself thinking about the strange, circuitous path that had led us here. How what I'd feared most, discovery, confrontation, truth, had ultimately freed us all from the weight of secrets. How my daughter's act of extraordinary generosity had rippled outward, healing not just Emma, but our family as well. For years, I'd defined strength as control, as protection, as keeping painful realities at bay. I'd built walls to keep out hurt, only to find myself imprisoned within them. True strength, I was learning, looked different. It was Sarah facing surgery with clear-eyed courage. It was Frank accepting Michael into our lives without jealousy or resentment. It was Emma fighting for life with tenacity and hope. It was Michael respecting boundaries while reaching for connection. And perhaps it was me finally understanding that I didn't need to manage everything, control everything, protect everyone. That vulnerability wasn't weakness, but its own kind of power. That sometimes the bravest thing wasn't standing firm, but learning to bend. Outside our window, a gentle autumn rain began to fall, the rhythm soothing against the glass. In the morning, Sarah would wake up officially an adult, with college decisions made and a future in medicine ahead of her. Frank and I would continue our therapy, building a stronger marriage on foundations of honesty instead of protection. Michael would find his place in our extended family circle, neither intruding nor excluded, and I would continue learning this new way of being, present rather than perfect, authentic rather than armored, trusting rather than controlling. As I drifted towards sleep, I realized that what I'd always feared as an ending, the collapse of the careful structure I'd built, had actually been a beginning, a chance to rebuild on stronger foundations, an opportunity to discover that family, like Emma's healing body, could incorporate new elements without rejecting what came before. Not a perfect family, by any means, but a real one. And finally, that felt like enough.